And there was Demeter and I were working for a financial services client. This was like 2.5 years ago now, probably. And we were actually doing something else using CART. We were doing some predictive modeling on a customer database. It was a just slightly different exercise. And this typing tool had come in from the supplier for the segmentation work we had done. And one of the segments the typing tool was just terrible. It was like 25% predictive success. It was awful. And so I said to Demeter, let's just try to see what CART would do if we just tried to run a typing tool using CART. And we went from like 25% predictive success to like 60, and with about an hour of work. So that started us down the path of, okay, let's see if we can build typing tools using CART that will be much more useful for our clients and actually make our lives easier too, because as we do ongoing work with our clients, it hurts us if our typing tools aren't working well. So to some extent, I'm probably preaching to the choir, but I think it's worth thinking through and going through what the advantages are and disadvantages are of using CART over the standard discriminant analysis technique. And there are at least seven key advantages in our experience. One is the toleration of missing values, which people will be familiar with. And in some cases, this is not an issue, but in many cases it is, especially if you're using outside an external customer database or something like that. Another advantage is it's just in general, it's a much more flexible tool, right? So for instance, we can, if we need to make sure that predictive success for certain segments is very high, we can construct the model using CART so that we favor those segments' predictive success. A third advantage is just the flexibility in iteratively deciding which variables to include and exclude. It's very easy to not just make the tree bigger or smaller, but also include and exclude variables and just see how the results change as you do that. And then a fourth advantage is the ability to finely tune the trade-off between predictive success and purity. So I'll show you a case study in a little bit where we look at that. But predictive success is what is the probability that any one consumer is classified into the right segment by the typing tool, and purity is among people who have been typed into a segment by the typing tool, classified into that segment, what percentage of those people actually came from that segment, right? And those two things can be in tension with one another, not always, but a lot of times they're in tension with one another, but you can figure out what the trade-off is you want to make and tune the model to fit that. We've also found, and this is actually in some ways the most important advantage for us in terms of our client work, is the adaptability and flexibility in terms of the usability of the tool. So we can trade off, we can use different models with more and fewer variables depending on how we're going to use it. If we're going to be using it for focus group recruitment, maybe we just want to have 5 questions we ask people. If we're going to be taking this and putting it into another major piece of consumer research, quantitative research, maybe we will have a larger set of variables. So we might want to use the different tools for different purposes, and it's very easy to adapt the CART model for those different purposes. And the other thing that we found is when we go ahead and we test this tool in subsequent research, which is at the end of the day, really, the proof is in the pudding. That's the ultimate test. Is when I go and I take this typing tool and I field another body of research, do I get segments that look like my original segmentation? If not, then either your sample from your original study could be bad or your typing tool is no good. Assuming that our sample is good from the original study, it's a typing tool problem. And we've found that there's just greater robustness in terms of the segment sizes and composition and behaviors when we do ongoing research. So we are big fans of CART for this specific application in end market research, and believe it should be much more widely used than it is today, because as far as we know, we're the only people doing it. And it's not hard to do. I'm going to talk a little bit about just the process to build and construct the CART model. And if you have any questions as I go along, please feel free to interrupt me. I'm happy to take questions now or at the end. There are a number of choices that one can make in building the predictive algorithm that can have an impact on the results, and the choice may vary depending on what the nature of the data is. So the splitting method is one important choice. Back to the earlier question, if our segments are ordered, they're typically not, but if they are ordered, then ordered tuning is the best splitting method. In cases where we are, as I mentioned earlier, where we have maybe we have 5 or 6 segments and we're targeting 2 for the client, there's 2 that are the most important, where we think the biggest opportunity is to grow the business, then we want to make sure that our model does a really good job of finding those people. And symmetric Gini as a splitting method allows you to basically impose classification errors so that you are favoring the predictive success of the target segments over the other segments. The missing value penalties are another place where there's choice to be made. So, as you know, what CART will do is if there's missing values, it'll use the surrogate variables to construct the model, and that will obviously impact the complexity and predictability of the tree and the code that you actually use to construct the typing tool afterwards. And you can either increase or decrease the penalty associated with using the missing values. So those are important choices that one makes as one goes through the model construction process. The other choice that one makes after the fact is around the size and complexity of the tree. So as I said before, and as I'm sure everybody knows, you can vary the size of the tree, and that's going to impact the typing tool algorithm. And depending on how it's going to be used afterwards, we might not care at all how complex the tree is, or we might say we can only use 5 questions and we need a tree that just uses 5 questions we're going to ask consumers after the fact. And you can do that, and you can see what the trade-offs are, what the impact is of doing that versus having a bigger tree. And we can expand and trim the tree, include and exclude variables to trade off the purity and predictive success that I talked about earlier. And so it's very easy to play around with the model and figure out what the trade-offs are that you're making. Our experience, and this is kind of the critical thing, is that CART-based typing tools outperform the standard typing tool algorithms. So when we switch to CART-based algorithms, we usually see a 5 to 15% overall gain in the rate of predictive success. And that's important when we're talking about companies making big decisions and resource allocation choices based on these models. We sometimes we're not just looking to improve predictive success, but actually decrease the number of predictors or variables that are going into the typing tool. And we often find that we can both improve predictive success and reduce the number of predictors that are going into the typing tool. So that has implications for ongoing consumer research, and it just makes it easier. And that can be important in certain situations. We also have used the algorithms to develop typing tools that we call adaptive or dynamic. And what that means is simply instead of having to ask every consumer 15 questions to classify them into a segment, sometimes what we can do based on the structure of the tree and an individual consumer's responses is type them into a segment before they answer all 15. Maybe they've answered 5 questions, and then we can type them into a segment. And again, when interviewing times are critical, if we're doing some type of focus group research, for instance, this type of tool can be very helpful. We also can use the typing tools to classify respondents in batch mode. So what that means is if we're going to field another big piece of quantitative research, we're going to sample, 2,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 consumers, we can create just the scoring code that can be used very easily, either in SAS or even in Excel. So we can provide this to clients alongside something that could be used for qualitative research. So that's not hard to do, and it can use variations of more or less the same model.